So this week we are going to be doing things a little bit differently. As I've already notified you, we will not be actually pushing to chapter 3 this week. Instead, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back to the first couple of chapters and re-go through a couple of things, make sure that we have a strong enough foundation to actually get through the rest of the book, and just even with the next couple of chapters. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to reading through the book is the vocabulary, since the vocabulary is probably the most important thing when it comes to just simply reading a text. And any text, obviously, but especially when you're learning Latin, if you know the vocabulary in general, you will have basically a very easy time with figuring out what most of the things mean, and the grammar is just a sort of almost a supplement that allows you to really understand how the words are working together. And because of this, there is a very strong need for memorization. Unfortunately, you can't simply abandon memorization just because we'll be primarily reading through Latin. As a lot of you have probably figured out, there's some difficulty when it comes to just simply reading through the book. I know a lot of you have been struggling with that. So because of this, I want to give this little bit of a guide in this first video for how to figure out the vocabulary words and how to really get them right. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that there are going to be words which are more difficult to memorize than other words. For instance, we have here the word or the suffix rather ne at the end of, or ne at the end of the end of the verb at the very beginning of a sentence. And the problem with words like this, ne, or in the next, in 2 pages down, num and ne, is the fact that they're difficult because of the fact that there isn't simply a single English word that really translates what they're doing. So there's not a picture. There's no picture for num or ne or quoque or quid or words like that. Whereas words like, say, insula, oppidum, and fluvius, you can see what a fluvius is, even if you've never heard of the word fluvius before, and you've never even heard of the English word river before. You can see right here that a fluvius is this body of water that's flowing out into the ocean. Similarly, oppidum, you just by seeing this picture, it's much more easy to memorize, because nouns, they're simply much easier to memorize than the sort of conjunctions or these adverbs or these what are called particles, like ne, because what ne and num simply mean nothing more or less than this sentence is a question. If you were to compare it to an English phrase, it would be a student raising their hand and saying, I have a question. Est Gallia in Europa? Is Gaul in Europe? That would be what it is. Now, ne obviously doesn't mean I have a question. Ne just simply means this sentence is a question. But even words like ubi, which means where, where is that? So even words like ubi, so like ubi est imperium Romanum in Europa and in Asia, in Africa, they're understandably more difficult to understand, but it's because of that you need to spend more time, more dedicated effort of just simply looking through those words and memorizing what they mean. You can get whereas you don't need to spend as much time memorizing words like fluvius or like oppidum or like even words like numeri. Numeri is still somewhat simple to understand because they're talking about numbers, and the number has a very numeri even sort of looks like number, and if you know what a Roman numeral is, it's a Roman number, and so that's all of those are words that are more or less easy to remember and understand. Whereas the words like ubi or quid or num are more abstract. So that's the first difficulty. The next tip that I want, or rather the next little bit of this video that I really need you guys all to memorize or remember at the very least, is it's this tip that it's this 3-step process for figuring out what a word you don't understand is. And I'll explain exactly why I need you guys to remember this at the end of the video, or maybe you already saw it on the assignment sheet, so it doesn't matter. But the first step is to, whenever you encounter some new word or some new phrase or anything like that that you just simply don't understand, or that you've never seen before, the first step is to look over at the side. So let's take this first sentence in paragraph 3. Julius, Aemilia, Marcus, Quintus, Julius, Sira, Davus, Delia, Medusque sunt familia Romana. Now, what does Medusque mean? Well, that's a weird word. Well, if you look over here, you can see that this little negative sign and then que. The negative sign, like how you saw in ne, basically means that it's a suffix. It's a word or a part of a word that comes at the end. And so que at the end of a word means et. So et, whatever. Think of these lines as being the same. It's just that que comes after the line and then et comes before the line. So medusque means et medus. Okay, so that means that que must mean and. Okay, so Julius, Aemilia, Marcus, Quintus, Julius, Sira, Davus, Delia, Medusque sunt familia Romana would mean Julius, Aemilia, Marcus, Quintus, Julia, Sira, Davus, Delia, and Medus are a Roman family. Oh, good. So and makes perfect sense. This is step 2. So step 1 is look over into the margins, see if that gives you a hint. In this case, it does. Okay, so it probably means and. Okay, well, let's go back into the sentence. Step 2 is let's go back into the sentence, see if that makes sense. And then we get to step 3, which is looking at other examples of the word. So, for instance, Marcus, Quintus, Juliaque sunt tres liberi, and then liberi sunt filii filieque. Well, okay, let's translate all the other words in the sentence. Marcus, Quintus, Julia are 3, and then liberi means children, but you get that from the next sentence. Liberi are sons and daughters. Again, in both of these instances, you can see that que makes perfect sense if you translate it as and. So that's step 3. And the reason for why I wanted you all to remember these steps is because I think that there's been a difficulty. So what I want you guys to do from now on is to, whenever you encounter a word you don't know, write it down. Then try to go through these 3 steps. And if you can figure it out on the first step just by looking over here, then all the better. Just write down what you think it means, but then try to figure it out. Okay, does this work with the sentence? If it does, then you've basically gone, oh, good. So now I know that this is what is the right word. However, if there isn't a marginal note, like for instance with the word quoque, go through steps 2 and 3 and see what word fits. If even after all that you still just simply cannot figure it out, then that is a time to use a dictionary, not the internet. Please stop looking up things on Google Translate, and here's why. Because if you're wondering why I use the word, the suffix rather, que, for my example, it's because of the fact that 2 weeks ago for your second assignment, I assigned a number of vocabulary words, and I put que on there, and I could tell by the fact that most people use the word that as their primary, as the word that they put down for que. I could tell that you just simply looked it up on Google Translate, because that is what the Google Translate is. However, that is not an accurate way of translating que, especially not within the context of the book. And if you had simply gone through this little bit of a process, you would have had no problem translating it, I think. All right, so Now on to the next video.